tradition that is absolutely brilliant when it comes to real life practical situations. And you'll see how brilliant it is because there are actual legal halachic boundaries within our tradition that say up to this point you should do this, but beyond this point you may think a little differently, and it's okay. If you could take all these texts like the Amidah text, here's another classic midrash. When you do a class in midrash with your new rabbi, this is probably one of the, because this is the basic proof text, one of the top proof texts from the tradition on Jewish bioethics, which is an exploding discipline right now, exploding discipline. This is the story of Judah Hanasi. Does anybody know the story of Judah Hanasi? It's from the Talmud. Okay, very simple. Judah Hanasi was the editor, one of the great rabbis in the intertestamental period. Tradition says he's given the kuvod of really restructuring a lot of Judaism to the academy after the destruction of the temple. He is in the last stages of his life. He is dying. And his disciples gather at the foot of his house in Jerusalem, and they are praying all day and night, please don't die, please don't die, please don't die, okay? His handmaiden, his servant, understands that Judah Hanasi is dying. And remember, the context is Talmudic. It's as if the prayers are interrupting nature, the act of natural death. And so what she does is she goes on the top of her house and takes a big clay pot and throws it down. And at the moment it hits, okay, there's this big smash, clash sound, and the disciples stop praying. And at the moment they stop praying, what happens? Judah Hanasi dies. Why is this such an important proof text? It's one of the classic proof texts in Jewish bioethics. Anybody want to hazard a guess how you would interpret this into contemporary life? Anybody? It's logical if you think about it. It all has to do with the power of prayer. Right,
Rabbi, Bob Weston had a hand, and then Sandra will unmute.
Okay, Bob, you were first.
Yes. Now, what in Judaism? What is the quality of life? If the quality of life is not good, they're put on artificial, pipe tubes and everything else. What does Judaism say about that?
We're going to get to that, and that's in part where'd Bob go. Bob is there. You moved.
Yeah.
It's Zoom things. Everybody's boxes moved. Bob.
Right.
We're going to get to that bit, but that's implicit in this midrash, because look, in essence, the handmaid is saying Judah Hanasi's dying. There's no hope. Everything's been exhausted. He's dying. Leave him be. By praying, you're interrupting nature taking its course. It's time. It's time. And so that's why she did that. And this proof text goes to all the response of when you're allowed to remove equipment, contemporary issues about quality of life, which is something we'll get to in a minute. I'm gonna write that down. So it's been a long day in India with Comcast. Linda, who is? Sandra.
Sandra,
ahead,
then
Ellen,
Linda Weinstein.
Okay, Ellen, you're going to quarterback because all I see is
Sandra, then Linda. Okay.
Sandra, go ahead.
At this point, I forget exactly what I was going to say because Bob said something, you said something, and it.
All right, we'll come back.
Repeat your question.
Back. What was the implication of the midrash?
That when the person is that close to dying, you should leave them leave them be. Don't try to interrupt that
Go ahead.
process. Keep them comfortable. I mean, it doesn't say that. Keep them comfortable, but don't interrupt and try to change the
Okay, you're
outcome,
right.
which is really, we know what the outcome is, and don't be trying to interrupt it.
Right. Okay, now hold that because you're right on target. And Ellen, who's last? Who's
You
next?
have Linda and then Ann Stone.
Okay, then we're going to move on. Go ahead,
Okay.
Linda.
I had an experience when my mother had acute leukemia and was very, very ill. And the hospice people came out to the house. And I remember she was asleep, but sort of thrashing around. And I guess she was having trouble breathing. I don't know. And I kept thinking, well, maybe she's got sleep apnea. I should just kind of shake her, you know. And the nurses said, no, don't interrupt this. They told me not to. Because
Correct.
they evidently were more aware than I was. They weren't as close
Correct,
to my mother as I was.
No, I understand. That's correct. We'll touch on that a little bit later on. Ellen, who's last?
Ann Stone, and then you move on, you said.
Yes.
Ann?
Okay, Ann, go ahead.
Do you think that prayer is that powerful that it could stop the process when it was time and they
Okay,
kept praying?
Great question, Ann. And this is why this is really a semester and not a little overnight. It's a semester because right now with that question, we would have an entire class on the power of prayer and the efficacy of prayer. So you need to know, Ann, that again, you're dealing with a midrash from the Talmud, where there was a belief that prayer could intercede. People still have that belief. How many of you, we're going to get so far off, but this is the fun of teaching this because you can't do this in this short amount of time. When we do the Mishnah Berurah prayer on a Friday night, how many of you believe, just raise your hand, how many of you believe that prayer is actually interceding with God for the person you're praying for? Raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4 and a half, 5. 5 out of 22. Okay. That's about right for our community. There have been studies, and in Jefferson, there's a gentleman, a scholar who studied this at Harold Koenig at Duke. Larry Dossey was one of the people who started to write on this 20 years ago. And they've tried to study the impact of prayer on people and whether people who are being prayed for actually understand that and whether it changes their body chemistry. And there's studies that say yes, and there's studies that say no. So your question is very much worthy of a whole lesson on the power and efficacy of prayer, which goes to another conversation of who the heck are you praying to? And I just did this with a congregation. I forget because I'm teaching a lot this month and next month. But when I asked them this question about, well, who are you praying? Are you praying to? Is somebody listening? The majority of the people in that call also said, no, we don't believe anybody's listening. So I said, well, if you don't believe that there's something, be quiet, something listening, then who you're praying to, other than yourself. So this prayer issue, Ann, is extremely important and very worthy of another conversation, a serious conversation, because it goes directly to what the Midrash is talking about, and also how all of us in the contemporary modern world of religion view prayer. So this Midrash of Judah Hanasi is extremely, but that's one of the proof texts. And really what it's telling us is that there may be in Jewish tradition times when it's safe to say, okay, enough, it's enough. And there is a passage in the Talmud which basically has the image of a flame, the flame of life. We use this in the prayer book all the time. And the idea of saying, is it ever permissible to let the flame of life flicker out? And the answer is yes. Are you permitted in Judaism to take that flame of life and actively end it? No. Are you permitted, indeed mandated, to allow that flame of life to flicker out in dignity and in sanctity? High mitzvah. Which leads to this generalization. And I'm just compressing a lot of text, because as you can see from just these two texts, we could be here all night if you unpack the hundreds and hundreds of texts that speak about bioethics and these decisions. But wait a minute, Bob. Let me get this out, because I'm old and I'll forget. The idea, the fundamental ethic. I'm going to call this the fundamental ethic. Listen carefully to the words. The fundamental ethic of our tradition when it comes to these conversations is the dignity and sanctity of human life and the preservation of human life in dignity and in sanctity. Once again, this is very important. The dignity and sanctity of human life and the preservation of human life in dignity and in sanctity. That's the Ritchie Address idea of the fundamental ethic of Judaism, and it relates to bioethics, end of life, all ethical medical decisions. Now, all of you now should be jumping up and down, screaming and saying, but that's meaningless in the 21st century, because dignity and sanctity are very, very personal. Anne's concept of what dignity, or what Bob Weston alluded to as quality of life, may be radically different than Linda's concept of dignity and sanctity, and your idea of what is dignified and sanctified and quality of life at age 30 may be very, very different what it is when you're 90. And all of that is true. All of that is true. That's why these conversations have to be had, and this is why you have to have built in every single year in your congregational program, this program, but lengthened with resources, etc. We do this a lot in congregation land, and this is why you must fill out your advance directive, and then you must have a durable power of attorney for healthcare, and you must have healthcare proxies, and you must have a PULSE form, physician order for life-sustaining treatment in the last 2 years of life, because your life depends on all this, period, end discussion. So that's the fundamental ethic, the dignity and sanctity of human life and the preservation of human life in dignity and sanctity, which means, are you allowed in Judaism to use animals in order to find medicines, in order to have a healthy quality of life? Answer, absolutely. Absolutely. Must you treat the animals with dignity and sanctity as you experiment on them? Absolutely. And the whole animal rights movement in Judaism speaks to this. May you use non-kosher animals in a Orthodox Jew in order to save or preserve a life? Answer, absolutely yes. There was a responsa way back in the 60s from an Orthodox Jewish community, and you can get all this, this is when the first transplant started in the 60s. If you remember the development of transplant, that asked the question, are you allowed to use a valve from a pig's heart to transplant into a Jew who needed a heart valve operation transplant? And the answer was unanimously, absolutely. And the reason was Judaism always goes to a higher value, always go to the higher value. The higher value in this case was pikuach nefesh, which means to save a life. And you are allowed to, in Judaism, to abrogate all laws, including Shabbat laws, in order to save a life. So this is a fundamental ethic, the dignity and sanctity of human life and the preservation of human life in dignity and in sanctity. Now, If that's all it was, it would be really easy. You just apply the law, apply this ethic to everything. We're done. Go have a cup of coffee, put your feet up, watch TV. But obviously, this is very subjective. So the next question is, given the fundamental ethic, and this is something that in my studies and work in my career, in my studies of the text, this is what I'm suggesting as this fundamental ethic. You are free to disregard it or disagree with it, but it works for me. How do you apply that fundamental ethic to the actual cases? I'm going to suggest to you that there are three, what I call, and pardon the sports imagery, three wild cards that impact how you apply the fundamental ethic to situations. Three of them. Number one, medical technology. Medical technology has changed everything. It's way out ahead of society. It's way out ahead of society. Medical technology has given us the benefits of longevity. It's helped double, and public health, double the lifespan of the average American in the 20th century, which was increasing until the 21st century. Now the average lifespan in the Americans have actually gone down, partly because of the pandemic. Medical technology forces us to make decisions that in previous generations we didn't have to make. Medical technology keeps people alive. Even in a previous generation or two, they would not have been alive. Medical technology has put people who've been seriously on the edge of death, and a couple of months later, they're out playing golf. Medical technology has made it possible for them to be alive, where a generation ago, you would have been at their funeral. Every single person on this call knows people who have benefited from medical technology. Medical technology is one of the wild cards that influence how we apply the fundamental ethic, okay? Because they're going to be doctors who are going to say to you, yes, we can do this procedure. It's very difficult. It's very, very difficult. And if we do it, the odds are that your loved one is going to be able to recover, where a generation ago would not have been possible. A family then has to make a decision. So medical technology also can be in a situation where, as somebody said once, just because you can do something doesn't mean you must do something. Some of us on this call have been with people, every rabbi's had this conversation, where a family will come and say, the doctors have said they can continue to do chemotherapy. They can continue to do these very advanced treatments. They cannot guarantee that it could give my loved one maybe another month, and maybe another 3 months, we just don't know. But we can do it. We have the ability to do this. And some families have said, do everything in your power. And some families have said, no. Parenthesis on the pain and on medical technology. There is no overriding value in Jewish tradition for pain and suffering. As opposed to other religious traditions, Judaism does not hold that pain and suffering proves any type of greater merit. In fact, just the opposite. And because of palliative care, a very prominent and growing specialty, it is possible to never have to deal and be in a situation where excruciating pain and suffering exists. In fact, when I ran our Department of Jewish Family Concerns before the union got rid of the department, we helped write the resolution for the reform movement that was passed as policy in the 90s on comfort care at the end of life, which is our movement resolution in favor of hospice care and comfort care at the end of life. All denominations in Judaism have such views. Okay? We are all in favor of hospice care. We are all in favor of comfort care and palliative care. In fact, well, we'll get that in a minute. So medical technology, very, very important on how we make a decision. Second wild card. This is in many ways a distinctly American challenge. The wild card of autonomy. In other words, who owns your body? Who owns your body? In the tradition, God. Because you're created in the image of God, you're created by God. I don't know how many of you here on this 20-some people on this call believe that God really is in charge of your body and your health. I'm going to suggest that most of us think that we have the right to make that decision. Okay, I haven't forgotten you, Bob. I just want to get through this and I'll come back to you. Autonomy is very, very, and this is a tension. This is a real tension within our tradition, especially in the liberal tradition. How much right do we have to exercise over our own life and death? And there are parts of the Jewish tradition that say you don't have that right. The decision rests in God's hands. Most liberal Jews, of which we all are, reject that and say, no, I have the right to make decisions about my own body. When I testified in New Jersey and wrote for the medical aid in dying bill in New Jersey, which is now law, it's been a law since 2019. It was opposed by not only the Catholic bishops, but the Orthodox community in New Jersey, because their view is saying, no, you do not have that right in moments of excruciating terminal illness to make that decision to end your life. That's in God's hands. So and there are 10 jurisdictions in the United States and all of Canada that have medical aid in dying bills. Florida does not. So autonomy is very, very powerful. It's because it really goes to what I think. This is why these conversations are very important. What do I think? This is why those advanced directives are very important. What do I want? What are my wishes? If you're interested in all of this, I urge you to read Atul Gawande's book, Being Mortal, M-O-R-T-A-L. It's a brilliant book, very worthy of a book discussion for the congregation. He writes for the New Yorker a lot. I urge you to read the book. But he also says, we have the right to ask, what do we want? What are our hopes? When is enough enough? What are my wishes? That's why these advanced directives and the documents is excruciatingly important. And time out. When we Atul Gawande, G-A-W-A-N-D, you go to the great God Amazon and put in Being Mortal, M-O-R-T-A-L, and it'll pop right up. Push the button, it'll be there in 24 hours. I just lost my train of thought, but it was a really brilliant comment, but I'll come back to it. I should never do that. I always kill myself because I always break my train of thought where I was going to go. So we'll go back to autonomy. So autonomy, this idea of making your wishes known. Oh, yes, I knew what I was going to say. That the importance of this is that because of the first wild card, medical technology, you need to redo your advanced directive every 5 years. Why? Because the technology changes and you change. What you thought you wanted maybe 5, 6 years ago may not be what you want now. And unless you update those documents, that's what people may go to. And this is extremely important. Last month, I had the honor and the sadness of officiating and accompanying a very good friend of mine's family on the death of their mother and wife, people I've known since 1968. Bessie died of COVID in a hospital in Atlantic City. And we did a deathbed blessing. And in the conversation that I had with them 2 hours before we did the deathbed blessing, we were all on a Zoom call from the husband, the two children from all over the country, and the sister. And the doctors had basically said, we could put mom on a ventilator. The COVID had attacked her lungs. They had a 5 to 10% chance of her being weaned eventually off the ventilator. But her quality of life, to go back to what Bob was going to say, I said before, mom's quality of life would be significantly diminished. She'd be on oxygen and almost bedridden for the rest of her life. What do you want to do? And there was this conversation amongst the family, and then we asked, did you ever write down an advance directive? And the husband said, we did, it's upstairs. I said, go get it. So he went upstairs, he got it. This is a very spiritual moment and very sad. And my friend read what he and his wife had written. And it was as if there was this moment. And I said, you know, your mom is speaking to you now. She's telling you her wishes. Take some time, take a walk. Let's come back in an hour. Just let this be. Let it be in your soul. But you all knew what, you know, and they came back and, you know, and 6 hours later she passed away. So the importance of these documents, I cannot stress. The importance of this, of honoring this wild card of autonomy is very important. The third wild card is spirituality. What do you believe? What do you believe? This is why it's important to have these conversations. What do you believe? Do you want this conversation? Do you believe in an afterlife? How do you believe in prayer? Do you want somebody to pray with you? This type of stuff. Hold that question, Ann. It's a very important question. What you believe spiritually about where you are in your life and how you want to be treated. And this has to be a lot of conversations now about the type of funeral I want. Do I want to be cremated? Do I don't want to be? All this type. These are important conversations, and they do impact the decision making. So again, the fundamental ethic, dignity and sanctity of human life, preservation of human life and dignity and sanctity, impacted by three things: medical technology, my own belief, autonomy, and what do I believe spirituality, okay? Now we're going to see how to apply all that to a decision, how you make a decision. But there's a couple of questions. Ellen, I think Bob and Ann had a question.
Okay. Bob, you want to go?
Yes, please. If you put in your will a DNR, what do Judaism think about a DNR?
Well, if you put it in your will, it's too late because you're already dead.
Okay.
If in your advance directive, if you outline the situations that you want, I mean, the advance directive that we created for my work that we're in the process of revising, we're going to put it all on the website, has about 6 or 7 or 8 different categories or scenarios that you could possibly be in. And if you put in there, under these circumstances, put a DNR, all things being equal, the hospital or the nursing home will abide by it. The problem with the advance directive, is probably most people just put them someplace that nobody can get to them. They'll put them in a safe deposit box, which is stupid. I mean, it's meaningless. It doesn't make any difference. You have to give it to everybody. You have to give it to your clergy, the nurses, the doctors, the nursing home, the continuing care retirement community, your physician, your lawyer, your children. Everybody should have a copy of it. Everybody. I know some congregations, Bob, when we were doing care and community setups, and I remember coming across a congregation in New York many years ago, we were doing this. You could do this, doesn't cost you anything. They actually had a big plastic sleeve with their logo on it, and they gave it to everybody who wanted one in the congregation to put their document in it. And so it would fit on the refrigerator door or the inside of the front door. So God forbid somebody living alone and they needed this, and the EMTs came, they're not going to go search a house for your advance directives. You may be unconscious. So this was in a display where somebody could see it right away. And also, there are now apps. You can go on the iPhone and you can load all of this information on your iPhone as well. The technology is existing. So that's why, Bob, now, I was just on a webinar with this morning with another organization that I work with on New Jersey. That's why the Pulse form supersedes the advance directive, because the Pulse form is, the advance directive is your wishes, Bob's wishes. The Pulse form, physician's order for life-sustaining treatment, is a doctor's order. That goes in your chart, okay? That supersedes everything. It's a doctor's order. So it's probably worthwhile, and the website is pulse.org, POLST.org, POLST.org. It's worthwhile for you to check out what the status of the Pulse form is in the state of Florida. And you can ask your physician. Usually this is done in the last year or two of life, okay? But it's worthwhile just checking out the website, because I think on that website, all the states are listed where the Pulse form is available, and it is transferable. But these are very, very important questions, and it goes to the quality of life. And we're going to get to some of those boundaries in a minute.
Dan had a stone.
Yeah, two things. First of all, the DNR, must that be on yellow paper?
Not that I'm aware of.
Not that you're aware of, because
No.
at one time I understood that I had to have it on yellow paper hanging in the bedroom, so that if
That's right. That's the same thing, and it's like putting your documents on that sleeve and putting it in a place where, God forbid, the EMTs would come in and they would see it right away.
Right.
But
I had to hang in the bedroom for leave.
And some people put it in the refrigerator. Look, when I had this problem, that's the wrong thing to say. When I had this journey with my mom, who passed away as a result of dementia, and in the last 6 months, I remember we had this conversation, and I knew what my mom was, because we had enough conversations about it, and we finally put in her chart in the nursing home, DNR.
Right.
And I know for a fact, when I got that call on a Monday morning at 7:30 in the morning from the nursing home where she was in the last year of her, which was horrible because she had no quality of life. They said your mom had an cardiac episode, blah, 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 blah. But really what they were saying is, hey, your mom had a cardiac episode, and in her chart was DNR, so they let her be.
My other question, Rabbi, that I chatted to you was the case that you stated before. Can the children override what you have in your paper?
Advance. Okay. Here we go. This is why this is a semester class. This is a Jewish concept called stewardship. And this goes into the fifth commandment. The basic answer is no. The Jewish answer is no. That if a person makes a decision, writes this out, ideally they've had a conversation with their adult children. But as you know, sometimes there's disagreement. Sometimes there's estrangement. Sometimes it doesn't work out as like it would in a Hollywood movie, okay? But under the concept of stewardship, the adult child is obligated to abide by the wishes of their adult parent, even if they themselves may not agree with those wishes. But if that adult parent being of sound, made these decisions, acknowledging, understood the consequences, understanding what they were doing, then under this concept of stewardship, the adult child is obligated under Jewish tradition to abide by these decisions. And every rabbi, every clergy person has had a situation where they've been involved in a situation where hold on for 1 second. So every person has been involved in a situation where at the last minute somebody rides in like the cavalry and tries to, and it's very difficult counseling situation, and to try to say, but your dad knew exactly, they made these decisions, they understood, I've talked to them, you really have to understand, and a lot of times to be very cynical about it. It has nothing to do with the fifth commandment. It has more to do with the inheritance and money and the will, and especially in blended families. This is another whole conversation. But the strict answer to your question, Ann, is according to the tradition, this concept of stewardship, that the adult child is obligated to respond and respect. It goes to the caregiving issue of the Torah of honor and respect, to respect and honor the wishes of their parent, even if they may disagree with it. So that, as I said, this is much longer. This is why this session is a semester in many schools and in many seminaries, or at least half a semester, because you can see some of the, and we're almost out of time already. So we have the fundamental ethic. We have the 3 wild cards that impact the fundamental ethic. And the last thing in front of us is then how do we apply these wild cards in the ethic to making a decision? So here is the Richard Address formula for making a Jewishly based decision on end of life, given what we've just discussed. 3 letters, V, C, C. V, C, C. They stand for value, context, choice. Value, context, choice. I want to warn you, we're going to probably run about 5 minutes over. I hope you don't mind. If you have to leave at 8 o'clock, call a vote, have a wonderful life. But I doubt I'm going to be able to, this is complicated stuff. I doubt if I'm going to be able to do this in 15 minutes. Value. What's the value that underscores this decision? 2 major areas of life: beginning of life, end of life. Peru or vu, be fruitful and multiply. These are all the conversations that have to do with the beginning of life. Birth, abortion, termination, miscarriages, rituals. That's not our subject for tonight. It's worthy of another conversation. Infertility issues, that's worthy of another conversation totally on the beginning of life. And Judaism has much organ donation, much to say about all this. And parenthetically, all the denominations in Judaism, have organ donation as a modern mitzvah. All the Orthodox Judaism, Reform Judaism, Conservative Judaism, Renewal Judaism, Reconstructionist Judaism, Humanist Judaism, I don't really care about Judaism, all of them have organ donation as a modern mitzvah. I can give you that's another class all to itself. It's very important you know that. The value that we're talking about tonight is the end of life. And that is usually associated with the value that we mentioned before called pikuach nefesh, the saving of a nefesh. Each one of us are a nefesh, a human life. Okay? Tradition says you can do almost anything in the world to save a life. You can even break the laws of Shabbat in order to save a life. And that goes into a long conversation of, well, what's the Jewish definition of death? Two definitions. Whew. One, the classic Talmudic definition, cessation of heart and pulse. Remember, this is medieval. This is before EEGs, EKGs, this G, that G, MG, whatever, which is a great car. The cessation of heart and pulse. In other words, if you were walking on Shabbat and a building fell on you, the question is asked, can somebody go into a public place and carry and lift? Because you're not supposed to do that in a public place on Shabbat. And the answer is absolutely yes. In order that you may see if this person is dead or if he's still breathing. How do you know if a person has died? Cessation of heart and pulse. Okay. What about the current or the new, as a result of the wild card of medical technology that introduced several decades ago what is so-called the Harvard definition of death, which is a flat EEG for a period of time, usually 24 hours. The liberal movements accepted this. The Orthodox movement rejected it until they accepted it. So all the denominations will accept, because of the wild card of medical technology that pushed this, the concept of brain death. Are there still traditional Jews who reject it? Yes. But the majority of contemporary Orthodox Jews, modern Orthodox, and all the liberal movements accept Harvard, the brain death as a determination of death. Okay? So this is another impact of medical technology. So here's the value we're talking about, the saving of life. Is human life, remember the fundamental ethic, the value of pikuach nefesh, the three wild cards, is human life of the highest value that in every and all situations, you must do everything in your power to keep that person alive. How many of you say absolutely yes? Raise your hand. All of you are correct. All of you are correct. There comes a time in the tradition which says, remember Judah Hanasi, this is why that's the proof text. There may come a time when the higher value is to allow the flame of life to flicker out. How? In dignity and in sanctity. Go back to the fundamental ethic. But how do we know? Jewish tradition, and this is across the denominational lines, have legal boundaries. The major boundary is called gosais. Gosas, or Gimel Vav Samach Samach, if you prefer the Hebrew. What's the definition of a gosais? Of course, there's a Talmudic definition of gosais. The Talmudic definition of gosais is a moribund patient whose death is imminent. Again, a moribund patient whose death is imminent. Now, the problem with that definition is it's meaningless in the 21st century. Because right now in the hospital, near every single one of us, people are being kept alive whose death is imminent, but they're being kept alive electronically by machines. So gosais is one of these terms that really needs to be reevaluated within Judaism. Because it's, in many ways, if you go to the strict Talmudic view, it depending upon the case, it can be meaningless. The Talmud, the rabbis asked, well, what does it mean to be imminent? And the answer was 3 days, about 72 hours. So if somebody is in the last stages of life and they're not moving, and this lasts several days, it means they're gosais. Once a person crosses this boundary, this is gosais. Up to here, I am commanded to do everything in my power to save that life. once that person crosses that boundary, may I still do everything in my power to save that life? Absolutely. Unless the documentation and the person and the conversation says, when it gets to this point, this is what I want. Must you? No. May you? Yes. Big difference between must and may. And that leads us to what I think is one of the great gifts of Jewish tradition, ladies and gentlemen, the fact that in these conversations, Judaism says you look at the case before you. Context, context. I believe that one of the gifts of our tradition is that we are a contextual religious civilization. We have the courage to see each case on its own merit. And once we evaluate the case, the C that's the second, value, context, choice. Once we examine the context and apply the value to the context, it allows us to make a Jewish choice, which may be between bad and badder. Okay? To say to the physician, that's enough. Let's make my loved one comfortable. Hospice care. That's still a horrible, it's still, because you want everything to be great. It's still a horrible choice. It's not a good choice. It may be the choice that fits the context and the wishes of the person. But for those of us who've had to make that choice, and some of us on this call have had to make that choice, and every clergy person has sat with a family when they made that choice, it still can leave you very empty. But choices have to be made. Context. I submit to you that that is really the really powerful aspect and gift of the Jewish tradition. And it's never easy. It's never easy. And everybody can give you chapter and verse on how people make decisions based upon technology, their autonomy, their own belief system, and the context of where they are in their life. I will give you just one, I always go back to the first time. The first time I had to deal with this as a kid rabbi. Thousand Oaks, California, 1975. Her name was Paula. That was her name. Paula, young woman, married, two charming, perfect little children. They had just moved into their perfect dream house in Thousand Oaks. Beautiful home, garden, lush landscaping, facing the mountain, the Santa Monica Mountains. Gorgeous. She's, at the time, Paula was about 35 years of age. They had finally made it. Paula comes down with brain cancer. She's being treated in oncology at Northridge Hospital, if you know LA, the Valley, okay? Her husband calls me up one day and says, Rabbi, can we go out to lunch? I need to talk to you. We go out to a horrible Italian restaurant next to the Kmart near the temple. We sit down, I order my, at that time, mandatory Diet Coke. He has a drink and he says, I'm being pressured by my wife's family and being called a murderer. This goes to Ann's question. I said, what's wrong? You know what the story is with Paula? Yes, we talked, et cetera, et cetera. The doctors came to her and said, where you are in your treatment, we can continue to be aggressive in your chemo. This is 1975, not 21, not 2021. We can continue to be aggressive in your treatment. We may be able to give you another 6 months, maybe a year. What do you want to do? Paula has decided that she wants to come home. She doesn't want to go through the chemo anymore. She wants to be surrounded by her friends and her family and her house and her garden, to be cared for by hospice when the time comes. But her brothers are accusing me of committing murder, and they're insisting that she be aggressive because there's always hope. What should we do? Am I making the wrong decision? And so for about an hour, we walk through this. This is really, to tell you the truth, where I began to develop this theory of value, context, choice, because he outlaid all the possibilities and understood. And at the end, it was quite obviously what the decision is. This was Paula's choice, not her brother's choice, but Paula's choice. Paula came home, and that last year of life was exactly as she wanted it. She was surrounded by her family. Interestingly enough, a lot of her friends stopped coming around. That's another conversation. For those of you who are mental health professionals, you probably understand the psychodynamics of this at all. It was very hurtful to her until the very, very end. Every single one of us have had, probably experience with friends or family, and every clergy person have had these types of conversations. They're very personal. Again, Judaism context. And there's a quote from a conservative rabbi who passed away, Max Artz, A-R-D-S-T, who said at one point, the quantity of life is in the hands of God. The quality of that life rests with us. And I remember reading it, and I wrote it down. I use it when I teach this, that we don't know our lifespan. We just don't. But we do know that we can control our life and how we live. And that's why that Arts quote is so powerful. So, in summary, fundamental ethic based upon Jewish text, the dignity and sanctity of human life, and the preservation of human life in dignity and sanctity, now impacted on decision-making by three things: medical technology, our own autonomy, and our own belief system, spirituality. Necessity of creating documents and getting our wishes known, and the revising of those documents on a regular basis based upon all three of these wild cards, which impact how we make a decision. How we make a decision Jewishly, I believe, again, this is purely my idea, so you're free to reject it or adapt it. The value applied to the case before us, the context, where we are in that context, the implications, our wishes, leads you to make a choice, even though we understand that sometimes those choices are between bad and badder, or bad and worse. Okay. Anybody want to raise any questions or comments? Bob?
Now, this is hypothetical. If you don't have children, and you don't have another family, like the family's passed away, who handles all the matters?
Oh, it's not hypothetical at all.
Yeah.
One of the people who write for me, Carol Leskin, who writes for the website, Carol Leskin, is exactly in that situation. She is what she calls herself an elder orphan. She has no family. She has no children. She's never been married. There's actually an international organization around this, and she writes for them as well. So a lot of times people will, go to their elder care attorney, as everybody should have them, and draft those documents and place them in the appropriate places. And in the advance directive, where you designate those people who are designated legally to make decisions for you if you cannot make decisions for yourself, which is why the healthcare proxy is even more important than the advance directive, because the healthcare proxy is the document that can be used to say, if this person is unconscious, in a coma, can't speak for themselves, these people, and usually 3 or 4, in ascending order of importance, are designated to make the decision for me, because I've had this conversation. And so in those situations with no family, A lot of times people will use their closest friend, people that they trust, an attorney, an elder care attorney that they've had this conversation with, their physician who they've had this conversation with. And in truth, right now, according to the ACA, physicians are compensated in Medicare for having an end-of-life conversation with their patients.
Mm.
So that's how you do it. Yes, it's very important to update these things. I'd say every 5 years, because the technology changes and you change. You know, case in point, 5 years ago, who ever heard of COVID-19? Now we've lived through this, and many people are revising their wills and advance directives in light of this experience of the last year. So this is very fluid. Ellen, anybody else?
I don't see any hands. Anyone?
Okay, let's check the chat. Let me check the chat. Change the
There was an
calendar.
interesting question Goldie had, heart and pulse or breath and pulse?
Heart and
when we were-
pulse. Heart, because that'll keep the breath going.
Okay.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that's a very, very, and believe me, when I say brief, I mean brief overview of about 3,000 years of tradition vis-a-vis end of life. These conversations are still going on. Every single denomination is continuing to do responsa. The conservative movement is just about to publish a new responsa on medical aid in dying. The advanced directives continue to be written. I have in my file, because this is part of my work, an advanced directive, even an advanced directive for people who have been diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's. So that if this, God forbid, happens, you can begin to sit down and make decisions on what if. So this is all this stuff is very organic. I urge you, you have to build in this type of a forum every single year for your congregation, because people who are not here, who think it doesn't mean anything, doesn't relate to them at all, a year from now, they will be walking this walk. And they need to know, synagogues need to teach our own people that Judaism has so much to say. And believe me, we've just scratched the surface. We haven't touched a lot of this stuff, but this gives you an introduction. If there are specific questions or stuff that you want to follow up on, email me. You know how to get a hold of me, rfaddress@gmail.com. The resources, the Gowande book. We're going to be putting all of our advanced directives, life data, funeral planning, et cetera, eventually on the website. I have somebody working on the revision right now. 5 wishes is something. We haven't even touched the implications of the redefinition of terms in light of Alzheimer's. We'll talk a little bit about that in next month when we do the health and wellness. So I wish you all of you a great evening. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay out of trouble, or don't get caught. Get the vaccine,
Yep.
Wear a mask, and do all the right things, because life is more precious than anything right now. And don't put yourself, you're not supposed to, Judaism says, put yourself in danger. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you,
I'll hope to
Rabbi.
see all of you Sunday
Rabbi.
for the
Wonderful.
Wizard of Oz. Bye-bye.
Yeah, Monday.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Go watch the movie.
Okay.
Bye-bye, guys.
Bye. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank
My
you.
pleasure.
The
Ellen,
Thank
room
you.
will be, I'll leave the room open if people want to chat.
Where can we
Thank
get the
you all.
movie? Ellen, where can we get the movie?
Let me just stop recording.
What movie?